Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to the Art of Moving Boxes. I'm James Goldman, and I appreciate you spending a part of your day with me. Whether you're joining from a warehouse floor, a distribution center, an office, a truck cab, a break room, or watching the replay, um, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I truly do. As you are joining, let me know where you are watching from and what part of the industry you are from or you are in the chat. Have the chat set up. Please go ahead and ask questions. If I can't get it on this show, I can get it on the next show. I will be taking questions at the end of the show for Q&A. And so please put your thoughts, put your opinions. I want to hear it. So I've spent nearly 30 years in warehouse operations, supply chain, and WMS implementations. I've worked on the floor, I've led teams, I've directed distribution centers, I've helped companies recover troubled projects, I've seen projects go well, and I've seen projects go sideways. For the last 18 years, I've been running my company, my services company, Warehouse Advisory Group, JGA, and we have done probably, and then within my entire career, probably done uh, a few hundred implementations. And so I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, I've seen the ugly. One thing that you will learn about me is that I have just a simple style. It's no BS. I'm not here to embarrass companies. I'm not here to create drama. I am not here to be negative for the sake of being negative. But I'm also not going to sugarcoat the reality. Um, you know, I feel sometimes that the distribution center, the warehouse floor is treated like a black box. I think that people truly don't know um, what's going on within the four walls of the facilities. I grew up in distribution. I was originally an operator and then got into IT, but and then the system side of it. But I truly saw within my career what actually happens in the warehouse, and I think there's quite a disconnect. I think that people who are learning supply chain in school or in college, have a limited view of what goes on within the four walls of a distribution center. Um, I recently just published two books, The Warehouse Never Lies and The Art of Moving Boxes. And I was sending copies out to different academic institutions and professors. And one of the comments I got is that there's not enough focus on what actually happens in the warehouse. People blame, transportation. People blame transportation. People blame procurement, but people don't know how the warehouse impacts everything downstream and upstream. So this show is about real operations, real lessons, real results. So my topic today is is my first topic is going to be the warehouse never lies, and that's really the premise of this entire show, not just this show, but the series, my YouTube channel, the Art of Moving Boxes. Everything is based and predicated on the warehouse never lies, and this phrase means a lot to me. I have seen it prove itself over and over again. Reports can be wrong, dashboards can be misleading, project updates can sound cleaner than the actual operations. Meetings can make people feel comfortable. And trust me, I've sat through thousands of these meetings. But when the work has to move, reality shows up, and the warehouse always tells the truth. The floor tells the truth. It shows if your processes are weak. It shows if where your training didn't stick. It shows where your inventory accuracy is not real. It shows where your leadership accepted the shortcuts. It also shows where the system is being blamed for the process problem. And it shows where people are carrying the operation instead of the operation being properly uh, aligned and designed. Uh, and that's why I say the warehouse never lies. It may not always tell you what you want to hear. Trust me on that one. But it'll always show you what is actually happening. So a lot of this is predicated on early in my career when I was a young director for a major retail company. I had a consultant assigned to work with me. And that experience absolutely changed the way I look at operations. I mean, I grew up as an operator. I understand one thing, a couple things about the operation is operators, they tell the truth. You know, if you ask the floor, it's like truth serum, what's actually going on. You know, sometimes you may not like what you hear, but 99% of the time it's factual. And the experience of having Dennis, and I'll call him out by his first name because he had a major impact. You know, he he taught me a lot of he taught me two really important lessons, and one was do three things right instead of 10 things mediocre. And then he told me about you know checking with the floor. So he would ask me questions like about the warehouse. I would give him the answer, which I believe was right. I did. Sometimes the answer was based upon what I thought. Sometimes the answer was based upon what I heard from leadership. Sometimes it was based on what the reports say that we read in our daily meetings and the reports that I got. Sometimes it was based on what the meeting said. A lot of times it was based upon what the meeting said. And then he would do something very simple. He would say, let's go ask the floor. And that line stuck with me. So let's go ask the floor. Let's go talk to the floor. So he would take me straight out to the warehouse and he would ask operations the same question. He would ask the receivers, he would ask the pickers, he would ask the supervisors, he would ask the people actually doing the work. And many times the answer from the floor was different. And I'm not going to say that it was embarrassing, because at the level that I was at, a director level, um, I did not, um, I told Dennis based upon, like I said, the meetings, the reports, working with my colleagues, but many of the times the answer from the floor was definitely different. Um, so I wasn't embarrassed, but the whole situation was very humbling. Nobody was lying. Leadership wasn't always wrong. Um, but the floor really had the real operating truth. The floor knew where the process was broken. The floor knew where the workaround was. The floor knew what the report did not show. The floor knew what people were doing just to keep the operation moving. And that taught me something important. You can learn a lot from a meeting. You can learn a lot from a report. You can learn a lot from your leaders. But you really want to know is what's happening on the floor. That changed my whole perspective on the way I did things. I mean, I would, from that point on, like I said, it's not that I was embarrassed. I mean, I certainly felt uncomfortable about the situation, but the way I am is that going forward, that wasn't going to happen anymore. And I really, from that point on, if I had a question, I would walk out on the floor and I would talk to the operators and I would talk to the way planners and I would talk to the supervisors and I would talk to the shipping office, receiving office, and I would get the answers, to my questions directly from the floor. And yeah, it kept me out of a lot of hot water, but it took up to the point that Dennis coming in, kind of pointing that out, that where the reality work really stands. So, ask the people doing the work. Watch how the work actually moves. That is what I learned from the warehouse never lies. That lesson stayed with me. It shaped me how I looked at warehouse operations, and it shaped how I looked at WMS implementations as well. It shaped me on how I looked at go lives. It shaped me on how I looked at leadership, because the truth is the warehouse is usually telling you something before the reports actually catch up, and the warning signs are there. They show up first in very small ways: misscans, inventory adjustments, overtime. Overtime's bad. Don't ever let you Don't ever let anybody tell you that overtime is good, and we'll talk about that. Overtime is not good. Workarounds are bad. Um, supervisors fixing the problem manually. And then the worst thing you can ever hear from the floor, and that's just how we do it. Order, that's if you hear that, that's concerning. It's always been concerning. That's just how we do it. Order shipping because of the hero effort instead of a good process. Yeah, we'll talk about um, the hero, the hero effort. Heroes are not good. I mean, heroes are good, but depending on one or two people to hold up your entire operation, that is not good. It's not a good process, you know. And then receiving falling behind, replenishment problems, pickers waiting, pickers backed up, shipping scrambling at the end of the day. Those are just not warehouse issues. Those are business signals. They tell you how the company is really operating. And the warehouse is not just where boxes move, the warehouse is where business truth really becomes visible. So let me give you an example. I was working so I was on a process improvement team, and we were the pig team, process improvement gurus. We were able to carry on with that name for a couple of years, and then it became PC, and we had to stop with the pig acronym. But one of the things that we did is I was doing implementations, but we were also going in to different operations at a manufacturing company that I work for. And we were just going and doing optimization and doing process improvement. Um, and I had a team of engineers, I had a team of operators. And one particular uh, project that we were doing, I was working a project in a warehouse in Georgia, and we were analyzing the corrugate usage on the floor. The question was simple, were we using the right boxes for the right work? So we're sitting around the table, and it's like, um, you know, we had a supervisor there, the managers, facility DC director, and it's like, are we using the right boxes for the right work? And sometimes, and the responses varied, but the one that came out was, uh, well, sometimes we're not. Well, why not? Because we always do it that way. And, which is not again, that is probably one of the worst statements in warehouse and distribution that you can hear. But so we spent 2 days reviewing what was actually happened. We watched the floor. We looked how operators were packing items. We looked at what containers the items were slotted for. And what we found was simple but expensive. Operators were putting very small items into break pack boxes. In some cases, they were using much larger boxes than they needed. Now, what's interesting is that even today, I will get a package from, I'm a I'm a junkie when it comes to buying stuff from. I hate to use the word, hate to say it. I'm not calling them out, but I'm saying I use Amazon, eBay, Rakuten, whatever, Wayfair, whatever I'm using. I'm not saying that these guys are the issue. All I'm saying is that I use delivery, and I shop online. I'm a huge online shopper, and all these that I mentioned are great companies, and I enjoy my shopping experience. But once in a while, you will get a package. I'll order a pair of headphones, and it'll come in a huge box. And so, sometimes it's still happening, today. But like I said, in some cases, they were using a much larger box than needed. The items had a right size container available. They had the containers available, but the operation had fallen into the habit of using a bigger box. And this could be based on the operator too. And it could be based on. There's a lot of different reasons why. It could be training. It could be we're not stocking the boxes. So, pickers are moving. They're moving fast. You guys know you're packing out at a pack out station and something's not there, and you're just going to grab another box just to hold your grid up on the table. Um, and when we asked, we basically, we went out and talked to the packers at the tables, and basically heard the same thing. Why are you doing this? Why did you grab this box? And again, we've always done it this way. Um, that line should always get your attention. We've always done it this way. It's not a process. Sometimes it's the beginning of an investigation. Uh, After a 2-day review, we realized the opportunity was significant. By using the right corrugate for the right items, the operation could save about 100 grand. So this was in the early 2000s. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money today. Uh, and it's not from a new system. It's not from an automation project. It's not from a massive transformation project. It's from actually watching what was happening on the floor, from asking the better questions, from correcting a habit that became accepted as normal. That is how the warehouse tells the truth again, by watching. Nobody had to guess. Nobody had to sit in a conference room and debate it. The floor showed it, and the boxes showed it, and the behavior showed it, and the cost was already there. So we just had to look honestly at what was happening. And then, that story really matters because it proves something important. Activity is not the same as control. Boxes were moving, orders were being packed, people were working, but the process was not fully controlled. The warehouse exposed the waste and exposed the habit and it exposed the cost. And once we were willing to look at it honestly, the opportunity became obvious. Um, so the question for leaders is this: what is your warehouse trying to tell you that your reports are not clearly showing you enough? Not just are we on schedule, not just is the dashboard green, not just did the system go live, not just did the orders ship. The better questions are these: what did it take to make those orders ship? Did the process work? Did the system work? Did the team understand the work? Did the supervisors have to carry the day manually? And this is a big thing. You know, did the floor have to hide problems just to keep things moving? Are people doing things a certain way because it's correct or because it's just how we always been doing things? Yeah, and those results really matter. But how you got the results matters just as much. I remember, so we did 2 days of review in Georgia. We went back to the conference room, and everybody had a very sobering and humbling experience of what was going on. So there was a lot of things, um, we went ahead and, we didn't do, like I said, we didn't do major transformation. We didn't do major configuration. Sometimes it's just an SOP change. Sometimes, you notice working the floor is, the workarounds. The workarounds are, especially when pickers, packers, receivers, put away people, replenishment are incentivized, right? One thing we always said, and this is a common saying, that no matter what DC I've ever been into a warehouse, the the operator will find the shortest way of doing something. It may not be the right way, but it's the shortest path of doing it. And if they're doing the shortest path and it's not the right way, then then the warehouse will tell you the truth. And today's lesson may be really simple, but the warehouse exposes what the organization has built, ignored, tolerated, or misunderstood. And also, it exposes the process discipline, exposes leadership habits, exposes training quality, exposes bad data. Bad data. So we always say about warehouse management systems, or WMSs, is that it's an execution system. Garbage in, garbage out. You know, that's we'll dig deeper into bad data, but it's really true. It's garbage in, garbage out. And one thing, I was watching a video from almost 20 years ago that I did at that same manufacturing plant I was talking about when we were doing implementations. We did, it was the first company that we did, change management. And back then I definitely had a lot more hair, but, the message never changed. It's garbage in, garbage out. And then everything is process, process, process. That has been my mantra for, 30 years. You need to rely on the process. So, uh, again, it exposes the leadership habits, exposes the training quality, exposes bad data, exposes weak supervision, and exposes poor planning. It also exposes whether a WMS implementation was truly ready or just as reported ready. Trust me, I've been through them all. I've seen them. I've seen the ones that are ready, and I've seen the ones that have struggled. And there's a common thread to WMS implementation failure versus success, and it's much, you know, I believe that the leaders are the keeper of the culture, and if your leadership is your sponsor and is all bought in to the implementation, the team will be bought in. You know, I have been at some facilities where it's like NASCAR. These guys are trained. These guys are. Uh, Everybody's excited. The facility manager got them excited. Somebody HR got them excited, and um, and they were training. They were, you know, just it was just an excited group of people that I worked with. And then at the end of the day, we were like playing paper football during implementation. It was it was boring. Opposed to another company, or several companies I've worked at, they didn't embrace it. The leaders didn't embrace it. They fought us the entire way. And if you would ask one of my colleagues during the go live, somebody at VP asked, so what's the issue list like? And he said it's like drinking from a fire hose, and it was in direct proportion of the result, the effort that the facility put in or didn't put in. So again, it exposes whether we've done this way or we replace the process with real thinking, real process thinking. Again, process, 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 process. And it exposes whether leadership understands which roles are actually control the operation. Because the warehouse, they don't care what the meetings say. They don't care what the project plan says. They don't care. Um, the warehouse does not care if what was promised in the conference room. They, when orders need to move, the truth comes out. And another example of this is temporary labor being placed in key replenishment roles. Now, let me be clear, very clear. The problem is not temporary labor itself. Temporary labor can be valuable. Temporary labor can be an operation flex, and it is. And people during peak absolutely rely on it. I think it's an absolutely valuable part of, and a necessary part of the operation, being able to flex up and down. That's not the issue. Um, they can support the operation and the execution. The problem is where people are placed and how much training they have before they expected to perform critical work. There are 3 areas in the warehouse that require strong trained talent, and they are, they can they're failure points. There either can be success points or failure points. Um, and don't get me wrong, everyone in every position in the warehouse is important. But I've always said that there's 3 main areas that can make you or break you. One is receiving, the other is put away, and the other is replenishment. And I feel that those areas directly affect everything downstream. If receiving is wrong, the inventory starts wrong. If put away is wrong, the product is not where it needs to be. If replenishment is wrong, picking gets starved and confused. And if picking gets disrupted, shipping eventually feels it. So in this situation, temporary labor was placed in the key replenishment work. Um, it was a newer facility that I was in, and it was our first peak season. And there was a lot, it was a greenfield operation, and it was a lot of green management, a lot of green, um, supervisors, managers, leads. And they were, so I mean, they came up, you know, I was voted down, but they came up with the idea of putting key temporary resources into key positions, and one of them was replenishment. And there wasn't enough training. You know, they didn't fully understand what they were doing. Products started going into the wrong places. The floor became messy. Put away started having problems. Replenishment started breaking down. Pickers could not get what they needed. Inventory location accuracy suffered greatly. Eventually, the issue rolled all the way into shipping. Of course, shipping catches everything, um, and that is how the warehouse again tells the truth of what's going on in the floor. The warehouse exposed the leadership decision that was going on. It exposed the training gap, the lack of training. Um, it exposed the lack of process discipline. I honestly believe that you know, there needs to be a process. There needs to be discipline. But tribal knowledge does have its place in an operation, and it can be good used in in a positive way. Familiarity with the warehouse layout, familiarity with picking lanes, familiarity. Um, when you bring temporary labor and put them in these key positions, they don't understand, and the ramp up for them is going to be a lot steeper. So it exposed the lack of discipline. It exposed the fact that critical roles have been treated like simple labor coverage, and you can't do that. But those roles were not simple coverage roles. They were control pain points. And receiving put away replenishment are control points. Weakness upstream becomes pain downstream. And you cannot put untrained people into critical points and expect the warehouse to protect you. The warehouse will expose that decision. It may not be immediately, but eventually it'll show up, and eventually it shows up in put away, then replenishment, then picking, then shipping. And by the time shipping feels it, the problem has already moved through the whole operation. And this is why the warehouse exposes the organization, what the organization has built, ignored, tolerated, or misunderstood. So in that case, it exposed misunderstood. Uh, it exposed a misunderstanding of talent placement. It exposed a misunderstanding of training. It exposed a misunderstanding of how connected warehouse functions really are. And again, I'm a big champion of shipping because they often get blamed at the end. Um, but the problem may have started all the way back at receiving, put away, or replenishment. And that's why the WMS does not magically fix a warehouse. The WMS just exposes the warehouse. If your process is strong, the system can help enforce it. If your process is weak, the system will expose the weakness faster. If your data is bad, the system will show it. If your people are not trained, the system will show it. And if your leadership is not listening, the floor will show it. That's why I keep coming back to the same idea in my books on this channel. Warehouse operations is just not about moving boxes um, or shipping boxes. Which leads to a funny story. We say sometimes in the warehouse, we always had that saying, well, we're just shipping boxes. We're just shipping boxes, right? At the end of the day, we're just shipping boxes. We're not killing anybody. Well, I did a project for a major pharmaceutical company, and they were medical devices. And they called us into the conference room on day one of the project, and they weren't rude about it. They were just very matter of fact. They said that, we know that you guys always have a saying, we're just shipping boxes. Said, but if we don't get this heart valve out, if we don't get this pacemaker out, you'll kill somebody. So it kind of really stuck with me that we kind of always said that in the beginning, earlier in my career. But, at the end of the day, warehouse operations is not just, about moving the boxes. It's about the discipline. It's about the leadership. It's about whether the business can actually understand how work gets done. And in my book, that's what the art of moving boxes is about, and that's what the warehouse never lies shows through story. Sometimes the story is the best way to show what really happens when leadership systems and the floor really collide. And you know, I took my 30 years of experience and 7 years to write a manuscript for my first book, The Warehouse Never Lies, and it turned into like 5 books. I got 2 that are out already. Please go to Amazon, check out my books. Um, the and uh, the warehouse never lies is, I'm a huge fan of Jess Humboldt and the Phoenix Project and the Goal and the Alex Rogo series. So um, I decided to write a book in the essence of a story and a novel of what happens when all three of these, when leadership, the floor, and reality collide. So check it out. It's on Amazon. Um, so I got 3 practical takeaways so far. First, activity is not the same as control. A busy warehouse is not always a controlled warehouse. People can be working hard and still be working around a broken process. See it all the time. Boxes can move and the operation can still be unhealthy. Um, again, my books really, and I'm not trying to really plug my books, but I kind of really wove this message into the warehouse never lies. Um, Orders can ship, the process can still be fragile. The Georgia corrugate story example is a perfect reminder. Operations was working, boxes were moving, orders were being packed, but the container choice showed a lack of control. The box, the wrong box had become the normal box, and that's definitely not control. It was a habit, and the habit had a real cost. Second, the labor coverage story is not the same as operational capability. Having bodies in the building is not the same as having trained capability. Coverage does not mean control. Receiving, put away, and replenishment need trained people. These roles protect everything downstream. And if you weaken these areas, the whole operation eventually feels it. In the temporary labor story, leadership covered the position, but the operation did not have the capability in that position. We put the bodies in there. The bodies were thrown in there, but they weren't trained. They didn't, again, no tribal knowledge, no understanding of the position, and it became very messy. And that difference really matters. The schedule may show that the role is filled, but the floor will show whether uh, the role is being performed correctly. I have seen, of course, I've been through 30, 40 seasons of peak, right? Of different peaks, you know, and I've seen, I don't think there's enough shout out to HR and change management and the role that they have to play in order to staff these positions. But they have to work together with operations. And, the stronger peak seasons I've seen is where the HR team understands the capabilities needed for each role, not just placing bodies. HR is critical. Again, I said I started doing this in the late 80s. We didn't have HR, I was like a college football recruiter going in and trying to get people, to fill some of these positions, especially on the implementation teams. It wasn't, never had HR doing it. I was out again, like doing recruitment visits, trying to get people to be on my implementations teams. But we have evolved. We definitely evolved, and I've seen it throughout my career. So, you know, And again, the floor will show whether the role is being performed correctly. So third, listen to people closest to the work. The supervisors know, the operators know, the receivers know, the pickers know, the packers know, the shippers know, inventory control knows, and they usually know where the problems are on the floor. Um, so I've had some really good mentors in my career. I had one mentor that was an operations. He was a facility DC manager, director of DC, VP of DC, and he used to do walking around, managing by walking around with your hands in your pocket. And it was, it sounds lazy, but it wasn't. He would have a walk and he would walk around and he used to say to me, James, have a meaningful conversation with somebody every day. Walk the floor, observe the floor, right? Um, Walk the floor and listen to people, and then do the most important thing. Um, follow up, follow through. If somebody comes to you and tells you something, then you follow through. I still do to this point, carry a notebook, or a little pocket notebook. I've been carrying them for 30 years. And if somebody asked me something, I would write it down. I would tell them I may not know the answer now, but I will get you an answer. And then here's the most important thing. I think there's a really big, the lost art of the follow through. The of the follow through. I think people just don't follow through. I think it's just an old lost art form. It's like bad credit. Um, you know, if somebody credit's easy to get, but if you mess your credit up, then it's impossible to get back. Well, it's the same thing with credibility. If you somebody asks you something, you get them the answer, they're going to come. They're going to come to you every time. Um, when I was a supervisor, that was a lesson that I learned, and I would listen to my team. I would I would be on shifts where we had like A, B, C, D shift, and so we had four supervisors. It was 12-hour shifts, so it was rotating schedules. And some of my counterparts that were on other shifts, they ruled with an iron hand and they wouldn't listen to their people. So when there was a problem, they wouldn't want to say anything because they were afraid of, I don't know, retaliation, retribution, getting their head bitten off. And you know, my guys would keep me out of the ditch. I would listen to them. I mean, I got a few that would bitch and moan, but for the most part, I would listen to them. I would follow up. I would always be, professional and direct with them. But they would come to me and say, "Hey, James, there's a pallet trailer in the door that shouldn't be there," you know, and I'd move it, and so I covered my butt. And where other ships were getting in trouble for it, and so my guys would come to me and point out things, and weren't afraid. So it was really important that I listened. I had credibility. I followed up. I wrote things down. And because again, the floor usually knows the problems. Um, you know, the question is whether leadership has created an environment where people can tell the truth. And that story goes back to the consultant story. Uh, he didn't know the first answer. He didn't know, he didn't know, did not stop at what I thought I knew. He didn't stop at what I said. We're talking about Dennis, and my first story of, when we went out on the floor and talked to the floor, uh, and that's where the truth was. So here is today's warehouse truth. The warehouse never lies. It only exposes what business has tolerated. If you tolerate a bad process, the warehouse will expose it. If you tolerate bad training, the warehouse will expose it. If you tolerate weak data, the warehouse will expose it. If you tolerate shortcuts, the warehouse will expose it. And if you tolerate silence from the floor, the warehouse will expose it as well. If you tolerate it, we've always done it this way, then the warehouse will show you the cost. If you put untrained people in the critical control points, the warehouse will eventually show you the consequences. This is not whistleblowing. This is not drama. This is not operational. That is actually operational reality. So I want to pause here and I'm going to open up for any questions in the chat. If you have a question about warehouse operations, WMS, Go Live, leadership, or today's topic, drop it in the chat. I'll take a few questions before we wrap up. And this is exactly the kind of discussion I want to keep building. I created an Art of Moving Boxes LinkedIn group, and it's show everything I do, my YouTube channel, my LinkedIn group, my Instagram, my X, whatever media platform, it's all the Art of Moving Boxes, you know. And if this is topic has hit home, we can bring that conversation over to the LinkedIn group as well. So, I wanted to create a group where it could be a place where people can talk honestly about what happens in operations, not theory, not buzzwords, real operational lessons, real implementation lessons, and real leadership lessons. So, if there's no questions yet, here's a question that I think that matters. So, I did get a question in on how do you know if the warehouse is trying to tell you something? How do you know if the warehouse is trying to tell you something? So look for the repeated exceptions. Look for the manual workarounds. Look for overtime patterns. Look for supervisors constantly stepping in and look for areas where the system says one thing. Look for the people who are quiet because they do not think leadership will listen. Look for phrases like, that's just how we do it. And then look for downstream problems that keep. So I got another question. What is the first thing I would look at in a struggling warehouse? I would look at receiving discipline, inventory accuracy, location control, put away accuracy, replenishment discipline, supervisor behavior, how exceptions are handled, whether people trust the system, and whether the work being done matches the process that people think exists. I would not only look at shipping. Shipping may be where the pain shows up, but I would trace it back upstream. Receiving, put away, replenishment, because one upstream mistake can become a downstream failure. That's really, really important. So before we wrap up, I want to connect this back to the bigger reason I'm doing this show. Again, this is exactly why I wrote The Art of Moving Boxes and The Warehouse Never Lies. The art of moving boxes is the practical side. It is about warehouse operations, WMS process discipline, leadership, and the lessons that come up from real implementation work. It's grounded in real operations. It's about what actually shows up on the floor, and then again, the warehouse never lies. This is the story side of it. It takes those same operational truths that puts them into fictional warehouse and implementation and environment. It shows what happens when leadership pressures, systems, and floor reality collide. And if today's discussion resonated with you, both books go deeper into the same topic. They're available on Amazon. And soon I'll be putting them on Audible and audiobook as well. Check out the Art of Moving Boxes and The Warehouse Never Lies. Join the Art of Moving Boxes LinkedIn group. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and the Art of Moving Boxes on YouTube. And check out the Art of Moving Boxes merchandise if you'd like to support the channel. Subscribe for real warehouse, WMS, and supply chain lessons that actually show up on the floor. Again, I'm James Goldman. The warehouse is always telling you something. Make sure you're listening. Keep them moving.